of the soil. God Jordan and Lenora Jordan. We come to give God praise, to lift up his holy name. Because he said in his word, if he be lifted up, he will draw souls unto him. So here we are to lift up his holy name, that soul be saved. Hallelujah! 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 Hallelujah to the King. Hallelujah! 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 Hallelujah to the King. Let the Lord be praised. I praise his holy name. Keep my feet, Lord. Keep my feet, Lord. I will praise you all of my days. Hallelujah. 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 Hallelujah to the King. Hallelujah. 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 Hallelujah to the King. I come to you, dear Lord. I need your help today. I don't want to look back. I don't want to look back. I don't want to fall away. Hallelujah. 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 Hallelujah to the King. Hallelujah. 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 Hallelujah to the King. All my pain and my hurts, I come to you, my dear. Only you are Lord. Only you are Lord. God, wipe away our tears. Hallelujah. 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 Hallelujah to the King. Hallelujah. 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 Hallelujah to the King. I will mold my brothers, take them along with me. We all must walk in love of victory. Hallelujah. 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 Hallelujah to the King. Hallelujah. 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 Hallelujah to the King. Hallelujah. 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 Hallelujah to the King. Hallelujah. 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 All right, coming out from the people, son and daughter of the soil, God Jordan and Lenora Jordan. We got to give God praise to lift up his holy name. Because he said in his
All
word,
right, so today
he lifted up, he will draw souls unto him.
the topic
So here
is
we are to lift up his holy
out
name.
of the group of Sabbaths given to Israel, the Seventh-day Sabbath is only one aspect of the sign. So all scriptures will be taken from the King James Version, and we'll start.
Hallelujah to the King. Let the Lord be praised.
So,
I praise his holy name.
brethren,
Keep
the
my feet,
7 day Sabbath is only one Sabbath, out of a group of Sabbaths given to Israel as one collective sign to inform them that they were a peculiar people set apart by God from the other nations of the world. So, for confirmation, one can read Exodus chapter 31, verse 13, Ezekiel chapter 20, verse 12, and verse 20. So, I'll read Exodus chapter 31, verse 13. Speak thou also unto the children of Israel, saying, Verily my Sabbaths ye shall keep, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that ye may know that I am the Lord that doth sanctify you. And now I'll turn to Ezekiel chapter 20 from verse 12 and verse 20. Moreover, also I gave them my Sabbaths to be a sign between me and them, that they might know that I am the Lord that sanctify them. And verse 20, and hallow my Sabbaths, and they shall be a sign between me and you, that ye may know that I am the Lord your God. So, on this question of Israel's separation from the other nations of the world, it is also doctrinally beneficial to remember that the peculiar dietary laws given to Israel by God also serve the same purpose as did the Sabbath sign. Now, this point can be verified by comparing Exodus chapter 31, verse 13, or Ezekiel chapter 20, verse 12 and verse 20, which I just read, right? So you're comparing those two scriptures with Deuteronomy chapter 14 from verse 1 to 3 and the same chapter 14 from verse 4 to 21. So I'll just turn to Deuteronomy now, chapter 14, and I'll read from verse 1 to 3. Now, ye are the children of the Lord your God. So when he said ye refers to Israel. Ye shall not cut yourselves, nor make any boldness between your eyes for the dead. For thou art an holy people unto the Lord thy God, and the Lord had chosen thee to be a peculiar people unto himself, above all the nations that are upon the earth. So thou there in verse 2 refers to Israel. Thou shalt not eat any abominable thing. So what we're going to do now is turn to Deuteronomy. Well, we're in Deuteronomy chapter 14, just verse 4 to 21 now. So these are the beasts which ye shall eat, the ox, the sheep, and the goat. So this verse signifies that God is addressing Israel. The hart and the roebuck and the fallow deer and the wild goat and the plag and the wild ox and the chamois and every beast that parteth the hoof and cleaveth the cleft into two claws and cheweth the cud among the beasts that ye shall eat. Nevertheless, these ye shall not eat of them that chew the cud, or of them that divide the cloven hoof, as the camel and the hare and the coney. For they chew the cud, but divide not the hoof. Therefore they are unclean unto you. And the swine, because it divided the hoof, yet cheweth not the cud, it is unclean unto you. Ye shall not eat of their flesh, nor touch their dead carcass. These ye shall eat of all that are in the waters. All that have fins and scales shall ye eat, and whatsoever had not fins and scales ye may not eat. It is unclean unto you. Of all clean birds ye shall eat, but these are they of which ye shall not eat: the eagle, and the ossifrage, and the osprey, and the glede, and the kite, and the vulture after his kind. and every raven after his kind, and the owl and the night hawk, and the cuckoo and the hawk after his kind, the little owl and the great owl, and the swan, and the pelican and the gay eagle, and the cormorant, and the stork and the heron after her kind, and the lapwing and the bat, and every creeping thing that flieth is unclean unto you, they shall not be eaten. But of all clean fowls ye may eat. Ye shall not eat any of anything that dieth of itself. Thou shalt give it unto the stranger that is in thy gates, that he may eat it, or thou mayest sell it unto an alien, for thou art an holy people unto the Lord thy God. Thou shalt not seethe a kid in his mother's milk. So the scriptures to compare is Ezekiel chapter 31, verse 13, or Ezekiel 20, verse 12 to 20, and you're comparing those two scriptures with Deuteronomy chapter 14 from verse 1 to 3, and in the same 14 from verse 4 to 21. So, brethren, this surely explains why Sabbath keeping and peculiar dietary Jewish laws are almost always dealt with as a single package in the epistles. So let's turn to Romans chapter 14, and we'll read from verse 1 to 6, from verse 13 to 23, Ephesians chapter 2, verse 15, Colossians chapter 2, verse 14 to 16, Galatians chapter 2, verse 11 to 16, and Galatians chapter 4, from verse 9 to 11. And then you turn to Matthew chapter 12, from verse 1 to 8, Mark chapter 2, from verse 23 to 26. And when you read those scriptures, you'll observe that Jesus himself dealt with them similarly. So I will read a few. So I'll start off by reading Romans chapter 14 from verse 1 to 6.
Because he said in his word, if he be lifted up, he will draw souls unto him. So here we are to lift up holy name, that souls be saved. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah.
Okay, so from Romans chapter 14, from verse 1 to 6. Him that is weak in the faith receive ye, but not to doubtful disputations. For one believeth that he may eat all things, another, who is weak, eateth herbs. Let not him that eateth despise him that eateth not, and let not him which eateth not judge him that eateth, for God had received him. Who art thou that judgest another man's servant? To his own master he standeth or falleth. Yea, he shall be holden up, for God is able to make him stand. One man esteemeth one day above another, another esteemeth every day alike. Let every man be fully persuaded in his own mind. He that regardeth the day, regardeth it unto the Lord, and he that regardeth not the day, to the Lord he doth not regard it. He that eateth, eateth to the Lord, for he giveth good thanks, and he that eateth not to the Lord, he eateth not, and giveth God thanks. So I'll just read Ephesians chapter 2 from verse 15. Having abolished in his flesh the enmity, even the law of commandments contained in ordinances, for to make in himself of twain one new man, so making peace. So I will repeat the scriptures. So on your free time, one can go through the scriptures for themselves. So it's Romans chapter 14 from verse 1 to 6. Romans chapter 14 from verse 13 to 23. Ephesians chapter 2 verse 15. Colossians chapter 2 verse 14 and 16, Galatians chapter 2 verse 11 to 16, and Galatians chapter 4 from verse 9 to 11. Then you will turn to Matthew chapter 12 from verse 1 to 8, Mark chapter 2 from verse 23 to 26. Right, and as I mentioned earlier, to observe that Jesus himself dealt with them similarly. Now, in contrast, brethren, when one considers the teachings of the New Testament bride of Christ with respect to what is allowed to be eaten, or with respect to the observance of an holy day in this dispensation of grace, when one considers such passages as Galatians chapters 2 and Galatians chapter 4, and for other texts, Ephesians chapter 2 from verse 11 to 15, Colossians chapter 2 from verse 14 to 17, Romans chapter 14 from verse 1 to 3, or First Timothy chapter 4 from verse 1 to 6, one cannot help being convinced that God never intended that the Seventh-day Sabbath sign, nor the peculiar dietary laws given to the children of Israel, be included in the doctrines of the New Testament Church of Jesus Christ. Now, the truth is, the Sabbaths, the seventh day included, was specifically given to the children of Israel in order to separate them from the other people of the world. We read that in Exodus chapter 31, verse 13, Exodus chapter 31 from verse 16 to 17, and Ezekiel chapter 20 from verse 12 and 20. So it must also be remembered that circumcision of the flesh and Israel's peculiar dietary laws were given to it for the said purpose of effecting a separation between its inhabitants and the other people of the world. So, this explains the omission of the Sabbath commandment from the apostles' doctrine, brethren. So, I'll close there for today and I'll continue next week. Just to remind persons, the scriptures are Romans chapter 14 from verse 1 to 6, 13 to 23, Ephesians chapter 2 from verse 15, Colossians chapter 2 verse 14 and 16, Galatians chapter 2 verse 11 to 16, Galatians chapter 4 from verse 9 to 11, and Matthew chapter 12 verse 1 to 8, Mark chapter 2 verse 23 to 26. So please have a productive week and please remain safe, and I'll be live next week again. God bless.